Hello, friends of Lance! The World Cup ended just over 10 days ago, but the topic of national team football and FIFA is still going strong, and this time with an important controversy. UEFA, perhaps the most important confederation in the world, announced a boycott of FIFA and is even threatening even the holding of upcoming national team competitions.
And there are quite a few.
There are several, including the Women's World Cup and this year's Under 15 World Cup.
There's the Intercontinental, there's the Under 15 World Cup.
In 2030, there's the World Cup for national teams again.
In 2029, there's the Club World Cup.
And maybe all of this without the presence of UEFA's clubs and national teams.
And in fact, it really bothered them. You could already see federations in the last few days publishing statements against this FIFA idea, which, just to be clear, is the creation of a company. It's FIFA forward, right? They would commercialize part of the World Cup rights to private investors with the support of major institutions like JP Morgan Bank. And on top of that, the president of FIFA also put his own re-election in 2027 in doubt, which now has really become an open contest. There used to be more subtle discomfort, but now the split is more than clear.
And what's the reason for that?
The reason for that, it seems, is unbridled greed, a delusion of grandeur. Infantino had already been facing problems in this World Cup. There was that direct interference from American President Donald Trump in the decision about Balogun's card, right, in his sending off. He ended up being able to play against Belgium afterwards, and that already brought a flood of criticism to Infantino. And besides other issues there, which are not always directly related to FIFA. But FIFA's stance on these issues largely because of migration. The ban on the Somali referee, anyway, several events that happened in this World Cup that left FIFA's image, in a way, tarnished. But for better or worse, Infantino came out of the World Cup stronger, very close to the American government. Trump even considered him for the position of Secretary General of the UN, right? Yeah, a few days ago. But he was considered by the American government to take over as Secretary General of the UN, so he came out as a much stronger figure from the most profitable World Cup in history. But apparently this profit wasn't enough. A few days later, he simply came up with a proposal that wasn't discussed internally at FIFA, and that had a very negative impact, because the confederations were not consulted. And in a more radical move, right, UEFA in this case took a step further than the tone that was being adopted by all the other confederations and decided to break away once and for all. And since the World Cup, there had already been talk about the possibility of the president of UEFA, Alexander Ceferin, running against Infantino in the next election. But until then, Infantino had a very solid support base. Yeah, besides this issue of the split in the competitions, even the confederations that were his allies, like the AFC and CONCACAF, they issued statements against this proposal. We don't know the full extent of the political damage, because his re-election at the next FIFA Congress in March 2027 was all but assured. It was very difficult for anyone to challenge him. Today, you can't say that anymore.
Yeah, just to give an explanation, to give some context, basically what people are saying is that Infantino would be selling part of the World Cup, right? That would be it. It would be to increase, according to him, the funds, which would, according to Infantino, always be redistributed to the 211 federations, and the annual budget would go up from $40 million.
More than double, right?
To $120, $130 million? Yeah, but we know that the real reason behind this is to gather support to get re-elected. And remember, Infantino has now been at the head of FIFA for 10 years. Well, UEFA didn't like it and announced today, Thursday, that its 55 federations won't participate in any FIFA tournament while this measure is in place. Yes, scrapped, and we can't imagine any competition without the Europeans.
That's true. We're both here right now. I've got the schedule open here. The Women's World Cup qualifiers, the first part of the playoffs ends in December, and in February, it's completely finished. And the question is, will the countries involved in the fight for a spot in the Women's World Cup, which will take place here in Brazil in 2027, will they keep competing to finish the qualifiers and complete the groups for the 2027 Women's World Cup? In other words, the World Cup is at risk. And then we have a more immediate tournament, which is the Intercontinental Club Championship, involving all the confederations and especially usually the club from UEFA. They're always in the final, and we always hope that the Brazilian club will be in the final, but will they compete in this tournament? Will they be present there? And not just these two competitions, but we also have Youth World Championships. We have the Club World Cup, which will be in 2029. That's also at risk, and even the World Cup itself. And then you brought up a possibility, right? Yeah, the 2030 World Cup will be played in Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, each hosting a match in the first round for now, before they increase the number of teams in the World Cup. And then we have Morocco, Portugal, and Spain in this group. And we were talking, what can FIFA do, in your opinion, to change this scenario and put some pressure on UEFA?
So there's a discussion about where the final of the 2030 World Cup will be, keeping in mind that there are three main host countries: Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. And Spain is really pushing to have the final at the Santiago Bernabeu. It seems to me that one possible way for Infantino to put pressure on UEFA is to announce in the coming days that the final will be in Morocco.
They are finishing a stadium for 115,000 people in the coming years.
And for now, the African Confederation is supporting FIFA.
As far as we know politically, yes, there was only questioning about this specific proposal, but behind the scenes, it's hard to measure. There are several confederations. This is all very recent. I think this situation will still unfold in the coming weeks. Now, among the topics you mentioned, there are two interesting things. First, the issue of the 2030 World Cup. Infantino also had a bit of friction there with UEFA because he is, well, actually there wasn't really any friction, but right away he dismissed the possibility of increasing the number of teams, which was something brought to FIFA by CONMEBOL, but UEFA didn't want that at all. UEFA rejected that idea immediately. And Infantino kind of went along with it there. He didn't want to confront UEFA at that moment, especially because he already knew that the relationship with the organization was already a bit delicate. So this issue of expanding the World Cup, I don't know if he'll be able to use that as some kind of bargaining chip or not. And another issue was the way this proposal to create such a company was brought up. Yeah, regarding what you mentioned about doubling the capital of some federations, if you look at it today in the world, these more powerful federations, there are, I don't know, maybe 10 federations that could turn down $40 million. It's a lot of money. And this system is replicated at various levels of world football. It's not just in FIFA. You see the same thing in the CBF. You see the same thing in the Rio de Janeiro Federation. You see the same thing in several confederations around the world. And it's a system that equalizes the voting power of tiny federations and giant federations. And these are federations, the tiny federations are much easier to pressure. I'll bring this closer to home, but here in Rio de Janeiro, for example, you have amateur leagues from the capital voting in a federation's General Assembly. What is an amateur league from the capital? It's really an amateur thing where you just provide the bulls for the championship. After the championship ends, the guy is left with nothing to do, making it easy to feel pressured. And at FIFA, this is replicated on another scale, obviously, but these smaller federations also look for money to develop the sport in their country and for some other little things too, right? So yeah, it's Infantino. I think he tried to use something that has always historically worked at FIFA ever since the time of Vélez in the 70s. Yeah, but suddenly maybe, or I can't say for sure, but it seems to me like a clear case of delusions of grandeur. And he overrode the organization's own protocols. He acted without consulting anyone or having any internal debates, simply stating, whoever doesn't accept the proposal by the set date won't get the funds. And this caused a lot of discomfort, so much so that yesterday Infantino had already taken to social media a kiss Infantino, who throughout the entire World Cup refused to give press conferences, refused to give explanations, refused to answer questions. That same Infantino went on his social media yesterday to say that no, it's not like that, it's a democratic process. You can judge for yourselves. But only after everything had already happened.
That's not normal, right? We were even talking about this. FIFA used to hold press conferences weekly, sometimes even daily. Briefing.
Daily.
At the World Cups, daily. In this World Cup, we didn't have any major press conferences from FIFA.
There was no press conference with the president of FIFA in the United States.
Not even the closing one, which is standard procedure. There has always been a closing press conference. In other words, it seems like he took on the role of someone who spent time
with the American president.
Yeah, that's right. So he took on a role, absorbed some characteristics of that other person you mentioned, but it didn't go over very well for him internally at FIFA.
My question is, how far can UEFA actually be putting its cards on the table or just bluffing?
Look, if this goes through, it's an unprecedented split in world football, right? You're going to have to restructure the competitions, basically. How are you going to hold a World Cup without the European teams? No, that's inconceivable. So some other rearrangement will have to be made. It's still too early to say. It's too early to say how far UEFA will go, right? UEFA is going to carry this out. They're really going to push this. But yeah, it's not a bad thing to see someone finally standing up to one-man decisions and decisions driven only by commercial considerations.
How far will it go?
So I don't think UEFA is going to backtrack on this decision. I think it's very unlikely. We always joke that when the Euros happens, you just need to invite Brazil and Argentina, and it would basically be a World Cup. I really don't think UEFA is going to give in and support FIFA on this unless FIFA does something that's very favorable to UEFA, some kind of decision. For example, UEFA wanted to create their Super League and FIFA vetoed it. If suddenly UEFA creates and allows the creation of this league, I mean, if FIFA allows this creation and something happens, but I think it's hard because they have the main federation and the money, as well as the main national teams.
The best players, the main stadiums. And the other issue is also UEFA might actually be pushing this movement now precisely to promote its candidate, to promote Alexander Cheferin for the next election in March 2027. So maybe it affects, who knows, this issue with the qualifiers you mentioned, the Intercontinental, but to what extent does this already carry over to next year? For example, with Cheferin managing to get elected. Now, for UEFA to actually issue an official statement of that magnitude and then immediately backtrack because of some small concession from FIFA, I don't believe that either.
To finish, I'll give my opinion. UEFA isn't the good guy, FIFA isn't the villain. It's not a fight between a villain and a good guy, because in football, as Seda said at the beginning, the system protects itself. So it's not a fight between a villain and a good guy. Maybe they're not both villains, but they're definitely not both good guys. UEFA also has its own interests, as Renata mentioned, the issue of the European Super League. Yeah, that European Super League wasn't a good thing for football in general, because it was a competition that the big European clubs wanted to create to protect themselves and keep even more money than they already have. There was also an economic interest there. What UEFA is doing now is really going head to head with FIFA, but we know it's not just about the best intentions. There's definitely a matter of survival and who has more power. We'll be back at any moment. You can follow all the information on the Lance website, on Lance's social media, and on our Lance TV.